Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We should be starting in a few minutes. Welcome to day 3 of Ethics Week. You are in the introduction from the Director of Open Government and Electronic Meetings Training. All right. Good morning, everyone. It is 10 o'clock, and I will get started with our first session. Good morning, and welcome to day 3 of Ethics Week 2023. I am Niquelle Allen, Director of Open Government with the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability, or BEGA, and I am your instructor for this morning. This is me. It is a pleasure to be here with you today to introduce the Office of Open Government, which we refer to as the OOG, and our program offerings for today. I have served as director since 2018, and I have been with the district government since 2002. I spent most of my career prior to my tenure with BEGA at the Office of the Attorney General and served as agency counsel for several DC agencies. My long tenure with DC government has given me the experience to lead OOG and to advise on many issues related to government transparency. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the OOG. OOG is an office within BEGA that is responsible for ensuring that the District of Columbia's operations are open, transparent, and accessible to the public. The OOG ensures this primarily through enforcement of the Open Meetings Act, which we refer to as the OMA, and by providing advice on compliance with the District of Columbia Freedom of Information Act of 1976, which we refer to as DC FOIA. Collectively, these are the District of Columbia's open government laws. The district's open government laws are the focus of BEGA's Ethic Week programming today. The OOG enforces the OMA and provides advice on the district's implementation of DC FOIA. As Director of Open Government, BEGA's enabling legislation requires that I issue advisory opinions regarding compliance with the Open Meetings Act, provide training for members of public bodies and their staff on the Open Meetings Act, and issue rules to implement the OMA. I may also bring a lawsuit in DC Superior Court to enforce the OMA if necessary. Our enabling legislation also permits OOG to issue advisory opinions to render advice on the implementation of DC FOIA. OOG is also responsible for training the district's FOIA officers on DC FOIA's laws and regulations in coordination with the Executive Office of the Mayor. We also train advisory neighborhood commissioners, or ANCs, on FOIA twice a year with the Office of ANCs. OOG assists the public with their submission of FOIA requests to ensure that DC FOIA processes remain fair and available to all persons. In short, OOG advances government transparency by providing fair, objective, and clear guidance and training on the application of the Open Meetings Act and DC FOIA laws and regulations. In addition to our activities respecting these open government laws, We also assist the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability, our board, with issuing its 2022 Best Practices Report. They'll be issuing one this year as well, which includes recommendations on improving the open government laws and regulations. We release a newsletter 4 times a year that provides updates on our office's activities and open government issues in DC and nationwide. We should be releasing issue 4 this Friday. We provide legal updates on how to comply with the Open Meetings Act and DC FOIA after recent changes to DC laws and regulations. Some of you may recall we issued advice around the COVID-19 changes, and we also track legislation and litigation related to open government rules. So this is a picture of our office staff. You'll see some of us, well, you'll see all of us today. And here are our course offerings today. Once I finish with this introduction, I will be providing instruction on electronic meetings best practices. Our next offering is Who Wants to Be a FOIA Officer? Next, we have Newcomer's Guide to the Open Meetings Act. We also have How to Post on the Central Meetings Calendar. That's on open-dc.gov. And last, we'll conclude with an overview of recent Open Meetings Act and FOIA advisory opinions and advice. I'll end my opening remarks with the principles behind the district's open government laws. Access to public records and government meetings provides valuable insight into how district government officials make decisions and spend tax dollars that impact DC residents. The purpose of public records laws and open meetings is embedded in the concept of effective self-governance, which is democracy itself. For self-governance to be effective, those who are governed, members of the public, must be properly informed. The entire concept of open government laws contributes to an effective and accountable district government by discouraging corruption, by putting our government's operations in full view. So our mission is to ensure that government operations at every level are open, transparent, and accessible to the public. That is the A, or accountability, part of BEGA. So thank you again for your commitment to government transparency and for being here during Ethics Week 2023. I will now move on to my presentation on electronic meetings. During my presentation, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I'll do my best to respond to them. I'll read the questions out and we'll go from there. So electronic meetings best practices. So as you see on the screen, this picture here, this is kind of what we're doing today and what we have become accustomed to as we are in remote meetings most of the time. But our focus is public body meetings that are remote. So that's what this topic is about. So we're looking at the application of electronic meeting best practices to the Open Meetings Act. So just to start out, I'm going to go over just basic principles. As I said a few minutes ago, we're going to have a full training on the Open Meetings Act. But just as a basic proposition, all the laws that apply in person still apply with electronic meetings. So the Open Meetings Act, notice of meeting, meeting procedures, and record of meetings still apply when conducting electronic meetings. So when you are in a remote environment, you're doing your best to try to recreate what takes place in person in an electronic environment. So use that kind of as your guiding principle as you are conducting an electronic meeting, an electronic public body meeting. Now, we went over this kind of when we first went fully remote, but it bears repeating. A public body should have bylaws, and some public bodies' bylaws require them to meet in person or meet partially in person. That's not so much of an issue now because we don't have the public health emergency or any emergency going on. But you might want to adjust your bylaws to give you flexibility to be able to meet fully remote. Um, and our laws, our open meetings laws, allow you to do that. Um, you may also want to adjust your bylaws to determine how you're running your electronic meetings. There are issues that will come up that aren't specifically covered in the law or our regulations that you, as a public body or as an administrative point of contact who are assisting a public body or as an attorney who are assisting a public body, can put into those bylaws, which the board or commission can adopt, that will help you run the meeting electronically. So you can address the platform you're going to use, the types of things within that platform that you're going to use, and how you're going to use them, and those sorts of things in your meeting bylaws. So I'm starting off with this caveat: the best practice recommendations that I'm going to discuss with you today are not mandated by the Open Meetings Act or regulations, but these are based on our practical experience and expertise. Our attorneys and our staff members have visited many of your remote meetings, and we've noticed things that work. So I am relaying these things today um, to help you have better meetings that run more efficiently, and to kind of also show you some things that may be problematic to help you that if they come up, help you resolve them in a way that do not disrupt your meeting. So I'm going to start with going over the basic electronic meeting requirements that are in the Open Meetings Act. So these are in DC Official Code Section 2-576, the notice, posting, and publication requirements. So they are the same generally. So you always provide notice of your meeting as early as possible, but no less than 48 hours or 2 business days, whichever is greater, before the electronic meeting. So the posting needs to be online. So it should be on the central meeting calendar, which is at open-dc.gov or on your website. You should note that now the physical posting requirement is live again. During the public health emergency and all of the COVID-19 related temporary and emergency legislation, that was relaxed. That is no longer the case. So 48 hours or 2 business days before your public body meeting, even when it's fully electronic, you should be doing that physical posting outside of your office or meeting location. So what does that mean? So, we are BEGA, for example, our board members are fully remote, but our hearing room is still located at 441 4th Street Northwest. So what we are doing is we are still posting, as it were, before pre-pandemic when we had our meetings there. So we put our meeting notices outside of that location. So that's what that means, and that's what you're required to do now. You are still required to publish meeting notices in the DC Register. This does not apply to our education entities. Um, they have other means of doing that posting. Now, recall emergency meetings. You may have an occasion to have an emergency electronic meeting. Those postings go up at the same time as members of the board or commission receive that notification. I will note that special meetings are the meetings that occur outside of your regularly scheduled meetings. They're not emergency meetings, they are special meetings. And these have required the regular 48 hours or 2 business days notice for the electronic meeting. So just to impress upon you that these electronic meeting requirements are the same in this virtual environment as they are if you were meeting in person. Meeting notice content requirements are in sections 2-575B and 5765 of the DC Code. So the meeting notice content is the same as if we're in person. Date, time, location, and agenda, that should be on that meeting notice. We need you to have the statement that you let the public know that OOG's here for them. If they have any complaints, that they can contact us at opengovoffice@dc.gov. That statement that's here should be at the bottom of that meeting notice. And if you're going to have a closed session for any reason, you need to make sure on that meeting notice that you let the public know you're going to have a closed session of the electronic meeting. I'll get a little bit into what that should look like later. And the statutory reason for the closure should be on that meeting notice and describing what you're going to talk about. So attorney-client privilege conversations is a big one. So for example, that should be on there. Now, the meeting notice should include a dial-in number if it's a teleconference and a login or website link. If it's a meeting like we have, like a WebEx meeting now, or which most of us are having, you should make sure that information is on that meeting notice. Again, that's just like the address. Goes without saying, you need to make sure that the folks have a way to observe, to be able to attend the electronic meeting. Now, one of the features of an electronic meeting now is that the public does not have a right to contemporaneously view the meeting as it is occurring. Now, we would like that to happen, but we have technical issues that sometimes keep that from being a possibility. So you need to make reasonable arrangements to accommodate the public's right to attend. So that's making that available for them to log in, to call in. However, if you have a problem and there's an issue with the meeting and it has to conclude, or there's a technical issue, then you need to make sure you have that meeting recording and those minutes, and that they're able to view the meeting or otherwise understand what happened in the meeting as soon as possible after that meeting. And I must impress upon you, make sure that meeting is recorded. That is a requirement. The DC code requires you to take votes by roll call. Again, as I said earlier, you're trying to recreate what's happening in person. So if you're sitting in a hearing room, for example, and you're voting, you could see visually or hear what's going on. So this provision of the code was put in place, again, to kind of replicate in a virtual environment, especially if you're or on the telephone. So you're kind of knowing what's going on. And people still have teleconferences, so that is still in the law and applicable. Also note, during an emergency electronic meeting, at the beginning of that meeting, the presiding officer needs to explain the nature of the emergency. Usually it's something health, safety, and welfare, why we had to call this meeting with virtually no notice, what's the subject, the nature of the emergency, and then say how notice was provided. And again, any other Open Meetings Act provision that I haven't mentioned today needs to be followed just as if you were in person. So now I'm getting to best practices. So these again are best practices based on the Office of Open Government's experience. So some of you may have observed my team at meetings. So we attend meetings and we're there as a resource to be helpful. We're usually there if a meeting is held during the workday. We're sometimes there in the evenings to make sure that the tenets and the principles of the Open Meetings Act and government transparency are being followed. So as my staff is there, they have observed things that you're doing right. So we're not just there, we're not a gotcha agency, we're not there for that purpose. We're really there to be helpful. So we have expertise in Open Meetings Act. We also have expertise in parliamentary procedure. So if you notice one of my staff members there, we are a resource as well. If you have questions for us, we can assist you. But the next part of this presentation is derived out of our attending more meetings than your average person. So joining the electronic meeting is the first topic I will discuss. So there are two types of folks who are in meetings. They're the actual meeting participants and then the meeting observers. So the meeting participants are the public body members, the agency participants, that could be staff members, and members of the public who are commenting. So some public bodies have requirements to let members of the public provide public comments. So these folks should sign in to the meeting and identify themselves. I think it's good to create a clear record. You know who's there as the person or body who's managing the meeting. It's a way to keep account of who's supposed to be there. If someone is unable to, I think sometimes you have settings on maybe a Zoom account or WebEx account or whatever you're using that you can't change, which may not be your actual name. You might direct the person or persons to kind of put their name in the chat, and that's one way to identify who is there. If someone is joining by telephone, as you all may know, only their telephone number is going to show up. So you might not know who's there. And you might need, again, you'll hear about this later, establishing a quorum, making sure all of the board members are present. If someone's joining by telephone, you may, and especially if it's a larger body, you may have them announce who they are and the telephone numbers associated with that is associated with them, so you will know that they're on the call. So also each participant is responsible for maintaining their connection to the electronic meeting. If their connection fails, they should try to join as soon as possible. So we recommend always having a backup. So these type of meetings now, like WebEx we're on now, there's usually a telephone number associated with the actual electronic meeting. So if their internet is not working, they should be able to call in. So that's just another method of getting that participation. So once you call back in, identify yourself. Hi, this is Niquelle Allen. My internet connection is not working. I've called back from 202, blah, 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 and I'm back in the meeting. So preparing for those things will help you do things like maintain quorum and make sure that all the members are able to participate during the breadth of the meeting. But again, these things happen, but it's good to prepare beforehand to make sure all the meeting participants are accounted for and can maintain their presence throughout the meeting. Now, I must note, people who are merely just observing the meeting, there's no requirement for them to identify themselves. So they don't have to have any specific moniker or anything like that. They can just join the meeting. There may be times that you do need to have folks identify themselves, as I will discuss later, if there's some type of disruption or something like that going on during the meeting. But otherwise, there's no need to identify someone else who is just an observer. Another issue is quorum and internet connection. So a public body's action won't be invalidated solely because of the loss of or poor quality of an individual member's connection. So one of the prongs of a public body meeting is that we have to have a quorum of members of the public body members present to do meetings. So if we lose somebody because of an internet connection, we might lose that quorum. But just because we lose somebody doesn't mean we'll lose the quorum. So if there are enough people still there, you can continue with the meeting. But if you're losing that connection, again, we want to pause and try to get everybody reassembled. But you can still continue. Now, if you lose that quorum, so if you've got one of the smaller bodies and it's three of you and then somebody drops off, you need to wait and try to get that person back on. And again, that's when you need to have kind of that backup, have a telephone call and get the person back on the meeting. If you do lose a quorum to conduct business, You need to pause and refrain from discussing public business, government business, until till the quorum is established. And I see it's from Carol Black, can the meeting proceed but no action taken if there is no quorum? So the meeting can proceed to the extent that you're not discussing public business. So that's kind of eking into parliamentary procedure. So you can um, I would say discuss the weather. How is everyone doing? But kind of the agenda portion, the meat of the meeting, you have to stop that part. So you don't have to leave, so to speak. So if you were in a room, if you were all together in a room, you don't have to leave. But if you lose that quorum, you can't conduct the government business. So it's kind of a slight difference. Um, but you can't continue kind of with the meeting agenda business items, public business, government business items until you reestablish that quorum. And I would give the person kind of a reasonable time to rejoin. Um, and if you cannot reestablish that quorum, then you will have to adjourn the meeting. And I would say a reasonable time is probably no more than 20, 30 minutes, because then you're kind of veering into the public doesn't really have notice of this extended amount of time. But it's going to depend on the situation. But normally, I think if you have prepared, and again, I think it's usually just having a telephone with a reliable telephone connection, you can get somebody back on. And this is also worth mentioning. Um, make sure that you have a contact at the Office of the Chief Technology Officer or an IT specialist, or someone that you can call around IT issues in general. I think that's helpful, just in general around electronic meetings if something goes wrong, or have someone designated within your organization to take care of this issue. And I know in most organizations, we have varying levels of skill and around technical issues. But if you don't have a designated information technology specialist, designate someone to kind of figure these things out. I found, and probably a lot of us have found, YouTube is has a breadth of information about lots of things, and these meeting platforms is one of them, and how to use them. So you may want to designate someone uh, for that. And are the rules the same for advisory commissions? I'm not certain about that, Carol. I'll get back to you on that. I assume that the quorum rules are the same, but I'm not certain. Another question we get is the use of icons and other features. So to seek recognition, we've seen that public body members do use the raised hand icon to unmute their connection and seek recognition from the chair. I think that's a completely permissible way to do business, but I do like to see a verbal component to that. So if you're raising your hand and you recognize the chairperson saying something like, I recognize Miss Allen has her hand raised and would like to make a comment. So that if there's someone on the phone, there are other people who may not visually be seeing the meeting, that they understand what's going on, that is captured in the meeting recording. So I think, and again, as I mentioned earlier, when you're doing kind of your bylaws and how you're doing things, you can address these types of issues. But I think it's completely permissible to use icons and other features that are embedded within these platforms to do business. We've had questions about voting and using the icons, and I think it is okay to use the hand feature to vote if someone tallies it for the record. For example, the chair could say members Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe have their hands icon raised and vote yes. But again, that someone is kind of reading and dictating what's happening kind of into the record, so that it's clear that it's not just those of us who can visually see it, see what's happening, but that it's actually read and verbalized. I think that makes things clear, and also complies with the law. As we all know, for what's going on with our friends over in Congress, we all know what a roll call vote looks like. To accomplish that with the hand feature and things of that nature, I think is completely permissible. We also get questions about using the virtual chat feature to conduct business. I recommend that you don't use that for actual business. I think it's fine to to chit chat, but if you are using it to conduct business, you are going to be creating a record. So you may have to preserve that record as part of the overall meeting record. So one of the ways you could do that is kind of dictating that into the recording. Um, let's see. Um, let's see. I'm sorry. I see a question from Glenn. Is there a requirement that cameras be on if they are available? Glenn, there is no requirement, but we do recommend that the cameras be on. I think that that is a good way to do business, and I think that is one of those issues that the public body itself could take care of in its bylaws, requiring that the camera be on. But I think that there's nothing in the Open Meetings Act or the regulations that speak to that, but you can, as a public body within your regulation, I'm not sorry, within your bylaws, require that members keep their cameras on. But I do think that is a good practice. Again, it keeps you engaged. It, as I said, replicates what's happening in person. It allows the public to see their representatives, to see the members of the public body, and it causes you to be more present. So I do believe that and do recommend that members of the public body, participants, keep their cameras on. Um, and again, just going back to the chat feature, if you're going to use the chat feature for anything other than just general unrelated government business conversation, then you just keep in mind that you are creating an electronic record of government business. So kind of the last topic I'm going to touch on is meeting security, background noise, Zoom bombing, and kind of other issues that you may run into. So participants' behavior during the meeting. So the public body chair or the commission chair is responsible for maintaining order in the meeting. So that person or someone who's maybe designated as a sergeant at arms, so to speak, may direct the muting or temporary disconnection of any participant's connection or even an observer's connection if it's causing any interference with the electronic meeting. So we've all experienced that background noise. Someone may just be driving, someone may have a child in the background, but you can, as the chair, in particular, just direct the person be muted if it's disruptive, disconnected. Um, all participants should mute their microphone when they're not speaking. Just in general, it's going to reduce that background noise and interference with primary speakers in the meeting. Um, the chair will determine whether the participants are required to keep their video camera on or off, subject to their technical capability. And you can also address that in your bylaws. But I personally believe that it's important for public body members to have their camera on. I think it goes to accountability, but I will also say from a technical perspective, if you're having connection problems, you use less bandwidth if you turn that camera off. So that is a permissible time to turn the camera off if you start having connection problems. That's one of the things that you can do to kind of remedy it, because you start to use less space. So if you start having connection problems, that's one of the first things you can do to stay connected. So Zoom bombing, I know we've all heard about this unfortunate occurrence. It's Zoom bombing or Zoom raiding. That's a term that is not just happening on the Zoom platform, but I think that's where it kind of first started happening. So that means kind of a disruptive, unwarranted intrusion into your meeting, and the only purpose is to disrupt the meeting. So it's caused by an internet troll and somebody with a nefarious intention. It can be noise, it can be pictures, and it's just they're trying to hijack your meeting, disrupt your meeting, insert material in the meeting, and that's a terrible occurrence when it happens, but it does happen. When it happens, someone, usually your IT specialist or administrative point of contact, should mute and immediately eject the offending party from the meeting. That person or persons or bot or whatever it is might continually try to rejoin, and that could result in the shutdown of the meeting. If that happens, you do need to do what you need to do to regain control of your meeting. The public body members might need to move to another, uh, I guess, meeting address, like as it were, and record on another address. That again, that would be kind of one of those non-contemporaneous meetings, um, but make sure that it's recorded so the public is able to see that portion of the meeting, just to be able to continue to have business if a Zoom bombing has occurred that shut down the public link. Moving it over to a new link will help to minimize that disruption and keep it from happening, because the internet trolls will not have that new link. And one thing that I did not um, put on the slide, which I meant to, is about closed meetings or closed sessions of meetings. One of the things that our board does is we have two separate meetings. So we have a public link, and then we have a separate meeting for our closed session. We keep our public link running during the pendency of our closed meeting, and then we have our members come back and rejoin that public meeting that's been running when they go into closed session. There are several different ways that you can do that. If you are kind of ending the public meeting to go into a closed session and then starting it again, you need to make sure that you provide some type of time for the public participants to come back, an estimate for when you're going to be resuming that public portion of the meeting so people know. So we've seen that done a bunch of different ways. I personally think kind of the most efficient way is to have kind of the two meetings running, but there are lots of different ways to do it. But if you're going to kind of shut down that public meeting notice, the one that you noticed, make sure you let the public know kind of what time you're coming back to officially close that meeting, so that they're not just kind of hanging out there. So if you have any questions, I think I've seen them all in the chat. I'm happy to answer them at this time, but I've kind of come to the end of my presentation, and I'm not seeing any. So that is the end of our first session. So thank you so much again for your attention, and your time and attention, and your commitment to open government in the District of Columbia. Please reach out to us at opengovoffice@dc.gov if you have any questions, or if we can help you in any way, or if you need any FOIA or Open Meetings Act training. We look forward to presenting the rest of our trainings today, and we will see you soon. Take care.